Did you notice a little bit earlier this year, this guy started popping up in every Spotify playlist and in every song or artist radio that you played on Spotify? It seemed like every time I opened the app, Spotify forced me to listen to him, like he was suddenly the most important artist who ever lived. At first, I wondered how much his label paid for him to be promoted so heavily on Spotify. After all, Spotify doesn't have to declare when a spot in a playlist or on a radio is paid for, they just get to do it. Getting that prime spot in a popular playlist can literally make an artist career. So there's huge incentive for a label to make that investment when they're trying to break a new artist. I'm sure Somber's label paid a good chunk of money to get him that exposure. But the more I learned about Spotify and about what they want out of us as listeners, the more I started to think that maybe it wasn't all money. Maybe there was a very good reason that Spotify wanted Somber to be successful and popular. Somber, who was only 19 when his debut album came out, first got popular on TikTok, which isn't uncommon these days. That's kind of how it's supposed to happen if the social platforms have their say. TikTok has completely changed the way artists make music, and I think Somber embraced that to a really successful degree, but that's a topic for a different video. This is about Spotify. So many people have a viral song on TikTok that isn't met with the kind of streaming support that Somber had. So that makes me think there's something else going on there. When you really break it down, Somber's music is exactly what Spotify wants out of its artist. It was made for TikTok virality, so it's very hooky and catchy, or at least like 30 seconds of it is. And it's very simple, easy, inoffensive. It's not really going to get on anyone's nerves. It's not going to push any boundaries. It's not going to challenge anything. It's just vibey, melodic music. It's simple, it's emotional with a pretty catchy melody. It's perfect to throw on in the background while you're hanging out with friends or on a road trip because it will fill the space without taking too much attention. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all music needs to be challenging and groundbreaking. There's definitely a space for background music. There's a time for music like Somber's. Even the majority of the time, background music makes sense. I'm also not saying that Somber is like uncreative or not artistic. He definitely is, and he's making music that means a lot to him, I'm sure, and probably means a lot to a segment of people, to his fans. They really connect with it on an emotional and deep way, in the same way that neon pop punk meant a lot to me in the early 2000s, not because I thought it was inherently beautiful music. It just reminded me of my emotions and sounded kind of edgy. I don't think Somber thinks he's making world-changing music. I mean, when a reporter asked about his lyric writing process, he said, "I'd initially come up with, 'If your love was a pill, I'd overdose.' And I just thought that line, it was super powerful. And then 'Wrap me in your arms so my heartbeat slows.' Thought those two together were just amazing." So really, there's no sense of like inspiration or trying to get a point across. It's just those lines sounded good together, and I can respect that. My point isn't to say that Somber is a bad artist for making this kind of music. He's not. It's not to say that you should feel bad for enjoying this music. You shouldn't. My point is that this is the exact kind of music that Spotify is looking for. If they had it their way, every single person in the world would only ever be a passive listener to music. They put on an artist like Somber, press play, and let Spotify do the rest, letting Spotify soundtrack their life without ever actually listening to any of it. And I think that's completely changing the way that we listen to and engage with music. For this video, I'm not interested in talking about like the financial ways that Spotify is impacting the music industry, not because I think that's untrue or unimportant. It's definitely happening and it definitely needs to be talked about. But there's a ton of other content you can engage with to discuss that issue, people who could do it far better than I can do. Instead, I wanted to focus on what Spotify is doing to us, to individually, to us as listeners. And I first started thinking about this topic while I was reading a book called Mood Machine by Liz Pelly, which is fantastic book. It goes much deeper into certain things than I will in this video. Great jumping off point if you want to dig more into how Spotify is kind of impacting the way we listen to music. Highly recommend it. Spotify has said before that its dream, its goal is to have users press one button and then keep listening to music all day. And that's what's behind a lot of the homepage changes that have happened in recent years. They want you to boot up the app or open it on your desktop, just click one button and then kind of zone out while this music plays in in the background. They don't want you searching around for the right thing to listen to. They want to tell you what you should be listening to because that's how they can kind of bring you in and keep you there all day. They really don't want you leaving the homepage at all. They want to give you a list of things that they think you want to listen to and then have you just kind of get out of the way. And in order for that to make sense and be possible, they need everyone to be what they call a passive listener. I went looking for a good definition of passive listening, and this was the best one I could find, even though I don't really know who this guy is who wrote it, but I appreciated the definition. And he said, passive listening is any music that is listened to in the background with little attention on the elements of the music itself, often while multitasking. As one writer said in The Guardian, it is oral wallpaper. It is unengaged, somewhat uninterested listening. Background music. You might think that's not a problem. Music as background filler is something that we all do and has been done since recorded music became a thing, arguably earlier with radio. But the issue becomes when Spotify thinks that it is the only way music should be listened to, or at least it's the most profitable for them. So it is what they prioritize. Inevitably, what they prioritize becomes what musicians make, because the only way to make a living as a musician these days really is to pacify Spotify. Liz Pelly pointed out that pretty early on, Spotify realized that people use music to background and soundtrack certain moments in their day. Washing the dishes, driving to work, just whatever. You'll put some music on to kind of fill the space. And they realized that they could utilize that. So they began to position music streaming as a way to fill those moments. It became a game of finding out what was the most marketable moment and how can they put themselves in that space. And in doing that, they focused on the idea of moods and like what mood you're in and what music you want to be listening to in that mood. And Liz Pelly goes way more into that in her book. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend checking it out. And I think this idea of Spotify wanting to create passive music for you to soundtrack your life really goes into the heart behind why Spotify was created in the first place. The idea for this video started as me wanting to do a history of Spotify because I'm a music history channel and that was interesting to me. So the more I researched the early days of Spotify and the foundation of it, I was kind of surprised, but also not surprised at all, unfortunately. Daniel Ek, the co-founder and CEO of Spotify, likes to paint a picture of him creating Spotify out of a love and a passion for music and a desire to save the industry from piracy, which was rampant in Sweden. But that's not really the whole picture, or any of the picture. His background was in search engine optimization and online advertising, but I don't think he was ever super passionate about those either. What he really wanted was to build a successful company, so he leaned into his strengths and his experience. Spotify was created as an ad-serving company that happened to use music because it was, in theory, cheapest and easiest to get access to and to reliably stream. He knew how to make money out of ads, and he figured if he could bring people to Spotify for the music, he could serve them ads and make money. He also really loved torrent technology that certain piracy sites used, and he wanted to find a way to profit off of that. As Spotify grew, it was less about serving ads and more about seeing how large the business could be. That typical entrepreneurial mindset. It seems like he never really cared about the art of music making at any point of the story, no matter what rosy picture he tries to paint of it. Music was just the instrument with which he wanted to build his company. Having a successful company was the primary driving factor. I mean, they hired a guy who previously worked for a game company that would go on to make Candy Crush. That was their vision, addicting, mindless, and eternal streaming. Just like Candy Crush was not interested in revolutionizing video games and creating powerful art through mobile gaming, Spotify is not interested in music as art. So since Spotify's primary goal is to grow and become bigger, they want you to keep listening longer and longer, forever if they can manage it. So they've found that the best way to do that is by serving you music that is inoffensive and easy to listen to. Definitely not anything that you have to go find yourself. They want to bring it to you. Stuff that will kind of fade into the background you won't pay attention to, so you won't even think to change the song or turn off the stream. What will keep you listening the longest are songs that are not obtrusive. They are songs that are on in the background while you're barely paying attention to them. And when it really comes down to it, that's kind of demeaning to music as an art form. Not the idea of background music or this kind of inoffensive, easy listening music existing. It's always done that. But Spotify pushing that as the primary way we should listen to music, and really the only way if they had their say, it really delegitimizes music as an art form. It almost positions music in like a scene setting place where music has nothing powerful or important to say into our cultural moment. It's just kind of there to fill the space and to make a vibe. And I think we lose something when music is primarily seen that way. One of the ways that Spotify tries to influence what you listen to and serve you more of this inoffensive, passive listening type songs is through playlist. The playlist is king for Spotify. So many artists talked about how life-changing it is to have a song placed on one of these popular playlists, even for a month. It can bring in the kind of financial windfall they've never seen, especially if they're new and up and coming. The other primary way is through the algorithmic playlist, the kind of the DJ, the Discover Weekly, the daily list, that kind of stuff that's based around the insane amount of data that Spotify collects about you and of you, which is a whole different issue on its own. And you might think, isn't that a good thing? Spotify is collecting this data, realizing what I like, and feeding more of that to me. Isn't that a good thing for discoverability? Won't I find more artists that fit with what I want that I wouldn't know is out there? Like, isn't that good? But you have to think about what we've already discussed. What is Spotify's primary goal? To keep you listening forever. Who makes these playlists? Spotify. So it's not really your music taste. It's what Spotify thinks your music taste should be, filtered through the lens of keeping you passively listening for longer. And that's a lot of different filters that the music has to pass through before it gets to you. So can you really be sure that it's actually what you would most enjoy listening to, or is it just what Spotify thinks you should? And remember how life-changing it can be for songs to be picked up by Spotify and placed in more playlists. And that inherently changes the way that artists make music if they understand that they need their songs to be supported by Spotify in order to get any kind of streams. They're going to start making more of this inoffensive, passive, easy listening stuff to try and get in more playlists and get more attention. But we just kind of accept that box that Spotify places us in. Spotify says, this is your music taste, this is what you like, and we just say okay and press play and keep it on. Because that's easy and efficient, and the songs that they serve us are catchy and simple, but there's so much more music out there that you might really love if you were to step out of that box that Spotify places you in, but you'll never hear because Spotify doesn't think you will enjoy it. For example, I listen to a pretty wide variety of music, but the genre that I return to the most frequently is pop punk because I will put it on whenever I'm working out or rock climbing or whatever. It's the kind of music that I will just hit play and let Spotify do the rest because I'm not really listening at that point. It's just filler. So since that's the genre I go back to the most frequently throughout the week, that's the only thing that Spotify ever includes in my algorithmic playlist. If Spotify had their way, I would only ever listen to pop punk, despite my music taste being so much more varied than that. So in order to kind of explain what I'm talking about here, I figured I could show you my Spotify and kind of show you this. I'm sorry if it's too dark in here. I didn't want to set up all my lights for this, but these are my top artists this month. As you could tell, we got kind of a mixed bag here, right? We got some like pop, we got some R&B, R&B. I really love the new Amber Mark album. We've got Kate Bush because I did a video about her, so there's a lot of her in there. Some Saya Gray, some Obajang Yar, some Saba. So we got some rap in here with Outkast and Saba. We got Lord. We got some country with Amanda Shires and Jason Isbell. Got a little bit of a mixed bag here, right? But then if we go to my daily list, the list that Spotify makes for me, can almost guarantee most of it will be pop punk. So here we have my daily list, and obviously first one, pretty much all pop punk, right? Go Radio, Day to Remember, All American Rejects, All Time Low. The next one, again, pop punk, Modern Baseball, Saturdays at Your Place, The Front Bottoms. This is more of like a Midwest punk or pop punk, but still emo pop punk. The next one, this one is more, I guess, traditional punk in the way. I wouldn't consider this one pop punk, so we're 2 for 3. This one, again, not really pop punk, but Haley Williams is close. The Aces, The Beaches, they're pretty close. This one, I don't know what this one is. I mean, Pom Pom Squad, Blonde Shell, they're kind of pop punky. Winona Fighter's definitely pop punk, so this is a little bit of a mix of everything, but it's definitely got some pop punk in there. This one was just straight pop punk with Heart Attack Man, Mayday Parade, The Wonder Years, Trophy Eyes, like that's pop punk. I guess that's all of them. I guarantee you if we hit the DJ, it'll start playing some pop punk. So Spotify wants to keep you listening, and they do that by focusing on music that is easy to hear and using your data, what they think you most like hearing. They encourage you to not even think, but to open an app, hit play. It's turning us into passive listeners who are happy to sit in the box made for us by this huge company, and it's encouraging artists to play the game by creating uninteresting, toothless music to fit vibes and moods. That's all not that great, in my opinion. But I think Spotify and this focus on passive listening is hurting the industry and the larger music listening public in a different way that maybe isn't as apparent and evident. It's hurting music's ability to form connections and communities and really decimating the indie labels and the indie scenes that have done so much to impact and improve the larger music industry. Think about Nirvana. That band is like the prime example of a small indie band that changed the world. After they became huge, labels started scouring the indie scenes for the next Nirvana. They managed to shift the industry away from the hair metal and neon pop of the 80s into that alternative rock sound of the 90s. And they did it basically organically by rising through their local scene. Can something like that happen today? Can a small band from a local scene rise through the ranks and slowly take over the entire industry? I think to answer that, we need to look at how Nirvana did it. And this is going to be very brief, by the way. Nirvana were a part of a small community scene in Seattle that would become called grunge, but it was a development of the punk and hardcore scene that had existed in the country under the radar for a decade at that point. Their first label, Sub Pop, grew organically out of a punk or post-punk fanzine that became dedicated to supporting local bands in their community and smaller labels. They became popular because of college radio stations and underground indie magazines and this network of DIY labels and record shops and venues that supported them. Nirvana were very much a product of a smaller scene and sound. Maybe I'm too cynical, but it's hard for me to imagine something like that happening today. I think we've lost some of that community connection that music is so good at creating. I live in Nashville, so Music City, and I don't know that we have a local scene here. Granted, I'm old. These kind of like local revolutionary scenes that emerge and change things really kind of belong to like high schoolers and college kids who aren't as jaded and cynical as me. So it would make sense that if a scene like that was happening, I wouldn't be a part of it and I wouldn't know about it. But still, I'm pretty plugged into music. I think I would at least be aware of like something happening out there, and as far as I can tell, there really isn't much. Sure, there are local bands, there are local shows, there are on Broadway, there's a whole host of musicians who have connections and have a community, but do I really think any of them are primed to launch beyond that? I'm not so sure. I think the way that Spotify has us listening to music these days, the endless passive streaming, really makes it hard for these local scenes to emerge and develop. And then that makes it hard for indie labels and indie artists to continue sustaining themselves. Indie scenes flourish on this connection between fan and artist. I've researched a ton of punk bands and a ton of punk artists in my time doing this channel, and one thing keeps repeating in a lot of the stories about their early days, and it's this idea of connection. A lot of them came from an era when the major rock stars were like arena rock royalty. So you would even going to see their show, you would be way in the back watching them on a screen. There was no sense of connection there. And then they would go to a punk show and the band would be having drinks at the bar, or they would be in the crowd and just step up on stage when it was their time to play. They were a part of the community that they were performing to. It wasn't like a us and them kind of separation. Everyone was one thing. The bands were a part of the community. They weren't this godlike figurehead over it. And then this interchange between bands and fans was what made it so special. On the other side, Spotify does not care if you even know the name of the band you're listening to, or if they even exist at all. That does not matter to Spotify at all. I have songs that I've heard countless times because maybe I heard them once and I put them on a playlist, or they're part of an algorithm that Spotify keeps feeding me, but I've heard them so many times and I could not tell you the name of the artist that performs that song, let alone where they come from, what the name of the album the song is on is. Like, I don't know anything about them. I just know that, oh, I heard that song at least once and I liked it back then. And as sad as that is, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. There was even a time that I went to a concert because I knew the headliner and I liked the headliner, and then the opener started playing a song, and it wasn't until they started playing that song that I realized, oh, I know this person because I know that song. I had no idea what her name was or anything about her, but I knew that song, and it took me until hearing it at the show to realize that. And I think that's kind of sad. For Spotify, they don't care if you're an actual fan of an artist or a band or an album or a genre, even, as long as you keep listening. They don't care if you know anything about the music you're listening to. If they had their way, you might not even actually be hearing it at all. They aren't trying to get you connected to a band. In Mood Machine, Pelly interviews a former Spotify playlist editor who said they don't work for creating fans because that's not what they are for. It's just tangential to the system. Algorithmic stuff doesn't create fans either. Playlisting was a lot of lean back passive consumption. That was the end in and of itself. So this creates serious separation between the fans and the band who may not even know each other, but that connection is the lifeblood of the indie scene. A smaller band is completely dependent on you going to their shows, buying their merch. That's how they make any money at all. But how can that happen when you don't even know their name? So profits go down, indie labels have to close, indie artists have to find jobs. But even though all of that is happening, streaming has become so popular, pretty much the only way we listen to music, because it's so easy. It's so easy to become a fan of a playlist that Spotify will change for you rather than having to go out and find a new artist on your own. Maybe it's a good thing if music discovery is a little bit more difficult. Maybe it's an essential part of the process to have to work to find that new artist you love. You might think that Spotify, in theory, should be helping indie bands because it's so much easier to get access to their music. You don't have to go to some indie record store. Everyone's music is available anytime you want it. But that's not really the case because, as we've already said, playlist is king for discoverability, and major labels are able to pay Spotify for better placements in these playlists in a modern version of payola. So indie artists are really up against it. And there are certain artists that aren't interested in making the kind of music that's going to go commercially explosive. They're not interested in this kind of passive, easy listening stuff that's going to rack up millions of streams. They kind of want to be a little bit more confrontational, and they have an even harder hill to climb in this new Spotify world. And Spotify is not worried about this collapse of indie communities and this complete reworking of the music industry. They're kind of proud of it. They position their product as building a global community of music fans because, as we've said earlier, they aren't interested in music. They aren't interested in the art form of it. They are interested in their company being as big as it possibly can be. So having a global community of fans that they're able to curate for is one way to do that. Even beyond what it's doing to communities and scenes, think about what it's doing to individuals, to you personally. If you're old enough, maybe you remember how intimate and exciting it was to exchange mixtapes, or in my case, mix CDs. Giving people mix CDs was kind of like my love language in high school. I would spend hours picking the perfect 15 songs to put on this CD to give to the girl I liked or to give to my friend, full of songs that I thought they would be interested in. My older brother's friends in college, they would send me mix CDs, and that was what kickstarted my love of music. We've kind of just completely lost that. Playlists are not the same thing. Sending a friend a link to a playlist with 500 songs on it is not the same as exchanging mixtapes, even though Spotify tried to position it that way. So I think we've lost some of that community and intimate personal relationship that comes along with hearing a band, being super excited about it, and sharing it with your friends. Everything feels so distant and isolated now. It's all data-driven instead of community-driven, and I think that's devastating. So what can we do about it? And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus this video on what it's doing to us personally instead of like the grand scheme of the music industry as a business, because sometimes when you think about the artist payments and the different business ways that Spotify is impacting the industry, it feels a little bit hopeless. Like, what can I do about that, realistically speaking? We're talking billions of dollars. What can I actually do? It feels hopeless. And there are things you can and probably should do. You should go see your favorite bands live. You should buy their merch if you're able to do that. You should speak out using your voice, using your money to leave Spotify if you feel compelled to do that. There are definitely things you can and should do about the business side, but I think it makes more sense to kind of focus on what can I do to make sure that music streaming, because this isn't just a Spotify thing, it's all of the streamers, but how can I make sure they aren't fundamentally changing the way that I listen to and engage with music? So, one thing I really want to do is I want to plug myself more into the indie music scene around me. I want to find labels both in Nashville, where I live, and all over the country that are signing these smaller, little known bands and artists that are putting out really great stuff. And I want to support them as best I can. I want to buy their merch, sign up for their newsletters, which is something that Pelly argues we should be doing with the bands that we love. Don't rely on the bands contacting you through Spotify or through social media platforms. Be like more plugged in with them by being where they control it, essentially through a mailing list. I also want to have my music discovery be more of a personal thing. I want to hear about bands from my friends or from music magazines and publications. Again, I want feels a little bit more gatekeepy, but like I want to be told about bands instead of Spotify just feeding them into an algorithm. I think all of that will help me get away from the data-driven side of the music industry and have it be more community-driven again. So those are kind of my key takeaways from all of this. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be interested to hear if any of this resonates with you. If you disagree with me about all of this, feel free to leave all of that in the comments below. But thank you so much for checking this out. And if you're new here, this is not my normal type of content. I'm a music history channel. I typically don't talk about my opinions all that much. I just kind of tell the story of bands. So if that's interesting to you, feel free to check out some other videos or subscribe.